Hey friends, welcome back to Fantasy Wash. It's 2024, so let's jump into our first video of the year. Now, even though it's 2024, this is a 2023 focus video and that I'm going to be reviewing all of my 5-star reads from the last year. The way I'm doing this is that I went through my Instagram, which I'm going to have a little video up for that here, and saw all the books that I gave 5 stars to, and I'm going to talk about it. There was one book that I had listed as 5 stars that I changed my mind on, and I don't think it's a 5-star read anymore. And there was also a read that I didn't have labeled as a 5 stars that I actually have gone back and given a 5 stars to because I loved it so much. So I'm gonna try to do it in chronological order of the books in which I read them, the order of the books that I read them, and give a little brief synopsis about what they are, what I loved about it, and then we'll go on to the next book. Now, the first book might actually be a slightly controversial opinion in that in the Mistborn Era 1 series, I gave a 5 stars to book 2, which is The Well of Ascension. I loved Well of Ascension. I thought this was an excellent book. I loved all of the politicking that took place in this book. There was less fighting overall, which I'm not super in love with the way that Sanderson writes fight scenes a lot of the time. And I liked that we got to know particular characters on a deeper level. We got introduced to new characters, and we really got to explore the world more now that the first problem was resolved within the first book, and now we're dealing with the larger scope issues in book 2 and book 3. I thought book 2 was the strongest out of the series. It was the only book that I've given a 5 stars to in all of the Mistborn books. So I think that's fairly telling that I enjoyed it. The second book is going to be Warbreaker. I love Warbreaker by, again, Brandon Sanderson. I've talked about Warbreaker pretty much endlessly on this channel. I'm actually going to be rereading it in a week or so with Kyle from Read by Kyle. I think also that Christopher Navo and Ben from Books with Genghis Khan are going to be joining us, so that's really exciting. Warbreaker is one of the only standalone, I guess, I don't know if you can call any of the books in the Cosmere standalone, but it is one of the only standalone books within the Cosmere itself. It is such a fun read. The magic system was awesome, inventive, creative. The humor hit all the right notes for me in this book. It's really, I think, Sanderson at his best. There's only one other book that rivals that spot, but we'll get to that later as we go through the video. I'm putting my glasses on because I need to read my list in front of me. The third book on this list is The Princess Bride by William Goldman. I loved this book. I actually had no idea that it was a book for a really long time. I grew up watching the movie, love the movie. I quote the movie religiously, and the book is so good. Of all the film adaptations of books, regardless of genre, I feel like The Princess Bride is up there for the best of the best. It is so close to the original story, but the story fleshes out some characters a little bit more. We get a little bit more background, and the way that Goldman inserts his own humor into the story is 10 out of 10 perfection. Love it. Everyone should read The Princess Bride. Book number 4 was Tress of the Emerald Sea by Brandon Sanderson. This was secret project number 1. This is, again, another standalone, so maybe I like Sanderson standalones, but Tress is actually Sanderson's answering to The Princess Bride. He said he wanted to write a story like The Princess Bride. He definitely hit all the similar notes. The humor was there. The only real difference is that whereas in The Princess Bride, we kind of have a female protagonist that's being led by the male protagonist, it's the reverse in Tress, and I really loved that. It felt very fairy tale-esque. It was a new world for the Cosmere, but you still had an interesting magic system. It was science-based. I loved Tress. It has one of my favorite quotes of all time, any author. I love it. I've said it multiple times on this channel. I read it in my Tress review, which I can link here. I just love Tress. I think it is a beautiful story, and I plan on rereading it not too far in the future. The next book is The Blade Itself by Mr. Joe Abercrombie, which is where my love of Sandan Glokta began. I love the First Law trilogy. I love Joe Abercrombie. I love Sandan Glokta. I just was so psyched about this book. I don't know if there's another way to describe it. I got this book series from my husband. He tore through them and said he thought I would like it. I sat down and read it, and within probably the first 15 pages, I was laughing out loud, was hooked, loved it all the way through. Of the original trilogy, I like The Blade itself best, which I know, again, not the most popular opinion. A lot of people like Before They Are Hanged, which is book 2. But there's something just so good about being introduced to a world and characters, and I loved it. It's so good. It's gritty, it's dark, it's dim, the characters are terrible, and it's hilarious. And everyone should read it and enjoy it. If that doesn't sell you to it, I don't know what will. The next book is Piranesi by Susanna Clarke. I have also talked endlessly about Piranesi. This is such a great book. I know that it is a divisive book because for a lot of people that don't read fantasy regularly, it feels like it takes a long time for stuff to get going, but the book itself is really short. I think it's something along the lines of 247-ish pages. And it's so atmospheric from the very opening of the book. It's written in epistolary format, and all I'm going to say about this book is that there's a man in a house. That's all I knew when I went in, and I'm so happy that I knew nothing because it made it for such a enriching experience. The one thing I will say is that there is a mystery to this story, and I was so obsessed with figuring out what was actually going on. I dreamt about this book for a month after I read it. It was just a book that has stuck with me, and this is the book that initially I did not give 5 stars to, that I have gone back and given 5 stars to because of how much it has stuck with me. And I just love it. I love Piranesi. Next one, we are back to Brandon Sanderson. If you people know, I read almost all of the Cosmere last year. The only 2 Cosmere reads that I did not squeeze in last year, or 3 technically. I didn't finish all of White Sand. I didn't finish Sunlit Man, and I had started Dawnshard, but I didn't finish it. I finished it early in January of 2024. But I still haven't finished Sunlit Man yet. I'm not into it as much, but that's for a different video. So the next one is Emperor's Soul, which is a novella by Brandon Sanderson. Of his novellas, it's the one that I like the best. It is the only novella that I have given 5 stars to. I thought the magic system for this was so interesting. I really loved our wise man figure in this story. I liked our main character. I just thought that everything about this was great. And it's not long. I think it's 125 to 140 pages. And you get to know these characters on an intimate level. And I felt like it's clear Sanderson can do this in short format. And sometimes I wish he would condense things a little bit more. But I loved it. I just thought it was so good. And honestly, if you're going to read a Sanderson thing and you want to see his prose at its best, it's going to be The Emperor's Soul. The next 2 are written by the same author, and I read them back to back. One is a novel and one is a short story, and that is Circe and Galatea by Madeline Miller. Circe is, of course, a mythological retelling of the character and nymph Circe. She was initially mentioned in Homer's Odyssey, and in this story, she gets a whole narrative for herself. I loved Circe so much. It's one of my all-time favorites, if not my all-time favorite. I don't know if I can pick an all-time favorite. That would probably be too difficult. But I loved this book. It was beautiful. The story itself was so moving. Madeline Miller did an amazing job at different points of the story of making Circe the hero and the villain. And sometimes simultaneously, it was just woven so well. I loved that you got to know all of these minor mythological characters on a more intimate and deep level. It just hit all the right notes for me. For someone that loves mythology, or anyone you know that loves mythology, give them this book. It's really so good. And then Galatea is a short story that is a retelling of the Pygmalion myth that was originally written down by Ovid. And it was a really good read. I will say I didn't initially give it 5 stars until I read the afterword in her book, or in the little short story, and I loved it so much that it bumped it up to 5 stars. So definitely give those 2 a try. The next one that I read was The Hobbit. Now, I have not actually finished Lord of the Rings. Last year, I had started trying to read Lord of the Rings when I was much younger, and the films came out initially. But for some reason, I never had read The Hobbit, and I loved it so much. I listened to Andy Serkis's version, the audiobook version of it, and oh my gosh, he is just amazing. I mean, We know Andy Serkis is amazing. He is the gift that keeps on giving to our community, but it was so good. His voices were amazing. The songs, which I normally don't like songs in a story, I loved them in The Hobbit. I just, oh my gosh, I loved everything about The Hobbit so much. It's one of those books that you can go back to again and again and again. The world is so vast and big, even though you're getting to know these characters very intimately. With Bilbo, you know, he's this shy initially hobbit who doesn't want to go on an adventure, and then you have these dwarves that are trying to reclaim their homeland. It was just such a good story. I loved it. I can't wait to read it with my kid when she's old enough to understand what I'm saying. I loved it. 10 out of 10, 5 out of 5, all the fun things. Love The Hobbit. Next was historical fiction, and that was Augustus by John Williams. I have raved about this book. It was one of my top books of the year. I just loved everything about it. I have my degrees in Roman history. I love Augustus so much. And I just feel like John Williams did all the right research to write a historical fiction. He sounded like a classicist. He sounded that he was well-versed in the history, the politics, the religion, the scheming, the backstabbing. He gave clear, distinctive voices to every person in this book. The second you picked up the book, you knew immediately whose chapters you were reading based on the tone of voice, the language, the syntax they were using. All of it was immaculately done. John Williams, if he was still alive, I would seek him out and I would desperately try to have him on the channel to talk about this book, because it just is the best historical fiction that I've read. I'm reading I, Claudius right now, which is also very good, but it's just not even comparable for me. I think Williams is the chef's kiss. Next on my list is The Lions of Al-Rassan by Guy Gavriel Kay. This was my first UGK novel, and what a novel to start with. Again, I got this book from my husband, gifted it to him. As soon as he read it, he said it was probably his second favorite book of all time. So it was a high bar that was set for me. I needed to love this book. It did not disappoint. It had such good moments in this story. The characters themselves were all endearing. There were different times where you didn't know if you were rooting for one side or the other. They all had compelling aspects to them, and then simultaneously some of the characters that you really grew to like had very unlikable things about them. The setting was inspired by Moorish medieval Spain during the Islamic conquest. It was just, again, a really atmospheric book. The politicking made perfect sense. The way that he incorporated religion made perfect sense. You could tell that it was very clearly influenced by our world and real life events, but he put such an interesting spin on it that I just found this book and this world to be really enticing and really magical. And the read itself was just so good. So definitely loved Lions of Al-Rassan. Highly recommend that everyone reads it. Okay, so my last 4 are 2 books of one series and then actually 2 manga. So this was my first year reading manga, and I started reading manga. I talked about it in my video that I'll link, and I read Witch Hat Atelier, which I didn't love, but growing up I loved the anime Sailor Moon, and I thought, you know what, I'm gonna go and I'm gonna read Sailor Moon and see how I feel about it. 10 out of 10 nostalgia feel for me. I loved Sailor Moon growing up so much. I love it still as an adult. I cannot emphasize how much I love Sailor Moon. It makes me feel happy, and it's just joyful to read, and I love it. There's really, it's not one of those things that's going to change your life or, make you see the world in a new way. But in terms of how I felt after reading Sailor Moon manga, 5 out of 5 for volumes 1 and 2. I'm in the middle of volume 3 right now. Same deal. I love it. It'll likely be a 5 out of 5. But the last 2 books are books 2 and 3 of the Stormlight Archive by Brandon Sanderson, which are Words of Radiance and Oathbringer. Words of Radiance, I think for the most part, tends to be most people's favorites. I've seen some people that favor Way of Kings, which is book 1, and then some people that favor Oathbringer. However, that seems to be a very small number of people. Words of Radiance was fire from start to finish. The whole book was just spectacular. I loved it. You got to know characters on a deeper, more intricate level, characters that I loathed from the first book. I ended up really liking in the second, and was eager to hear about their plots. their chapters. I got excited when they came on the page. This was specifically Shallon. And I really got to like Adolin in this book, which I wasn't expecting to. And then in book 3, that took off even further, where Adolin really solidified himself as my favorite character. We started going into Shadesmar, which I thought was so interesting. And you just get to know these characters on such a deep level. And I thought that the flashbacks for books 2 and 3 were just meticulously done. I loved them. I loved who book 3 focused on. I loved Dalinar Kholin so much. The whole series is good. I've had my issues with Way of Kings. I had minor issues with Rhythm of War. Words of Radiance and Oathbringer were so good. I love them so much. And everyone should read the Stormlight Archive because of those 2 books. I had a great reading year. I did not anticipate that I would have this many 5 stars, but after having a many years break with reading and coming back to it, I had so much to catch up on, and clearly the fantasy community has just been killing it. Some of the books that I read were older books, such as Augustus, which is historical fiction, not fantasy, but Guy Gavriel Kay's Lions of Alverson is also not a new book, but it's been making the rounds on BookTube. But it just goes to show that there are always phenomenal reads waiting for you to find them. And not everything is going to resonate with you the same way that it resonated with me, but I hope that you also had a really fantastic reading year. I'm so excited for the books that I'm going to be reading this year. I'm already into several books. I'm almost done with Bester Cold by Joe Abercrombie. I have started Sunlit Man, like I said, but I'm just not feeling it right now, so I'll probably come back to it. I am reading Sailor Moon once again, and I'm reading I, Claudius. So I'm just having a good time with reading. There's some big series that I want to try this year. Specifically, I really want to get to Realm of the Elderlings, and then there's a couple of others that I really want to try. But let me know what you had for 5-star reads last year. Let me know what you're super psyched to read this year for 2024. If it's your first time here, thanks for stopping by. Hit like and subscribe and that fun little bell so you can keep up to date with all these fun new videos that I post. And as always, I'll see you next time. Bye.